There we go. Hello, everyone. Hello. Okay, wow, we already have a lot of participants joining. Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear us okay. Please let us know if you cannot see anyone's audio or video or hear anyone's audio. Okay, wow, we have a lot of people, about 30 people so far and increasing. So let me just make a brief welcome. Welcome everyone, all of the participants joining us today. This is our COVID-19 panel discussion as part of the Sparkdojo webinar series. We have invited guests and panelists from various countries across the world to share information, share insights, share their own personal experiences as we all face this pandemic together. So I just want to take some time to first maybe initially briefly introduce myself. My name is Reina Saiki. I am a program director of Sparkdojo. Sparkdojo is a communication training program in Tokyo, Japan. And I am originally from the US. I'm from New Jersey, which is a state next to New York. And I lived in the US until I was 25, working for the US government and a few NGOs and MPOs, and I moved to Singapore for a bit, and then I came to Japan 5 years ago and have been working here ever since. It's very nice to meet you, and thank you again for joining this discussion. So let me just introduce everyone else very briefly, maybe starting with Bente, because I see you here, so I'm gonna go clockwise from here. So Bente, you have a background from global HR, and you have worked with organizational and leadership development for more than 15 years. You have profound knowledge of different cultures, especially European and Asian cultures. And we were talking that you were also living in Singapore for a few years. And you have worked with global organizations and have supported companies with organizational development and capability development. It's very nice to have you, Bente. Where are you based right now?
I am based in Denmark, in the mainland of Denmark. So a very small country in the northern part of Europe. And I don't live in the capital. I live in almost in the countryside in a very small village. So I would like to contribute with the COVID-19 experience from a small village in a small country, yeah, that's where I am right now. And,
great.
I'm working as a freelancer, so I'm working from home normally. So this is not something special for me, but I guess I will tell them more about this later on.
Great, fantastic. Yeah, I think many of our participants today who are watching this webinar are based in Tokyo or, are residing in cities. So it would be great to get a perspective of, rural regions or suburban regions and how they have been coping with the pandemic. Great, sure. Thank you. And to my right, I see Dominic. So we're going to Dominic. Dominic, you joined the life insurance industry as a financial planning consultant and started the industry's first dedicated Japan desk operations to serve the Japanese community in Singapore. And you're always interested in new trends and harbors a secret ambition to be at the forefront of new and emerging technology. Welcome, Dominic. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And you are based in Singapore, you said?
Yeah. So I'm based in Singapore. It's a city of about 6-7 million people. And we've been the government has been very hesitant to call it a lockdown. So they have been calling it circuit breaker measures.
Circuit breaker measures.
Yeah. So only essential workers are allowed to go to work. Most businesses are shut. Just to make sure that the social interactions are reduced. So that has impacted our business quite a bit because more than the normal, or rather a person who deals with work management for Singaporean clients or other clients, as you guys might know, the Japanese place a lot of emphasis on face-to-face connection and building that trust, especially as a foreigner as a foreigner in Singapore, no. As a Singaporean-based business dealing with the Japanese. So it's been quite an interesting experience. I think we'll talk a little bit more, but it's been quite an interesting experience how we have had to adapt, and also how clients, the Japanese, have been able to adapt quite quickly, I think fairly quickly. So
definitely, yeah. And it would be interesting because I feel your industry, I mean, many industries have been hard hit by this pandemic, but I think especially your industry has been impacted largely as well. So it would be interesting to hear your insights about that as well. Thank you very much. All right, Michael is also joining us from Denmark. Hello, Michael.
Hello.
Hi, how are you today?
I'm fine, thanks. I'm fine.
Great. So Michael, you work at Christian Hansen, a global bioscience company based in Denmark that develops natural solutions for the food, beverage, nutritional, pharmaceutical, and agricultural industries. And you are currently working in the dairy sector, working in commercial development. But are you based in Copenhagen?
Yeah, just north of Copenhagen, I'm based. So, but you can say it's one of the northern suburbs of Copenhagen. So basically, yes.
Okay, great.
With regards to the COVID-19, then you can say this has, I guess, been one of the more impacted areas in Denmark. But with regards to the industry I'm in, you can say we're not seeing any slowdown as such. So you can say the challenges that we have been meeting are mainly being able to continue to run in a world where everything else is slowing down. But supplying into the food and pharmaceutical industry, we're not impacted negatively as such right now.
I see. Okay, great.
Yeah.
That would be interesting here to hear more about that. And also, we have two guests from Denmark, but it seems like you are sort of residing in different sort of environments and different areas. So it would be interesting to make that sort of contrast within the same country, because I know Denmark has been hit hard by the pandemic as well. Okay, great. Ajay. Hello, Ajay. It's very nice to see you.
Sorry. Good. Yeah, I'm based out of Dubai, and as you know, Dubai is same like Singapore is a cosmopolitan city, and in this region, I'll try to bring a perspective not just from the effect of the COVID pandemic, but we know the oil prices, and this region is heavily dependent on how the oil prices move. So if you look at it, because of one cause is another and another cause. So between this cause and effect, this region has been hit doubly hard. And I mean, Dubai per se was under lockdown for 3 weeks, but it was not a very strict lockdown. You could still go out for essential services. Now everything is opening up in phases. As I understand, they're gonna do that in 5 phases. And I'll try to bring that how businesses and life in general in this part of the world, not just Dubai, is coping up with this pandemic.
Definitely. Thank you very much, Ajay. And just to introduce your profile as well, Ajay is the marketing leader at Honeywell, working to promote environmentally friendly refrigerants and specialty chemicals across the Middle East, Turkey, and African regions. And you specialize in long-term strategic planning and working across geographies and functions to execute those plans. Am I correct in saying you are originally from India and you have relocated to Dubai?
Exactly, yes.
Great. Yeah. So even double perspective, maybe if you know some, the conditions in India as well, because they did do a severe lockdown, right? So it would be great to hear your perspectives about that too. Okay. And last but not least, Kyoko. Hi, Kyoko. How are you doing? Hello. I think you're on mute. Great. All right. So Kyoko, you're a communication consultant and public speaking coach, and also a public speaker yourself. You're originally from the US, right? And currently residing in Barcelona, Spain, where the lockdown was recently kind of lifted or eased. So that would be interesting to hear. And Kyoko's clients include business leaders, professionals, lecturers, and MBA students from across the world. And her focus is not only speaking techniques, but also building self-confidence and self-awareness of one's own strengths. So it's very nice to see you, Kyoko. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and you just finished a different webinar, right?
Actually, yeah, it's I guess there's a organization or an event called Digital Design Days where they have digital creatives from all over the world. And the founders are Italian, so they normally have the conferences in Milan, and I think another city in Italy. And they were heavily affected, clearly. Italy and Spain are the most affected European countries. And they just put on, it's actually a 3-day marathon with over 100 speakers and over 20,000 people who have signed up for this event. And I just gave my speech. So I was just coming back from that. It was very exciting. And talking about innovation and inspiration. And my specific talk was about how to give your creativity a voice, how important speaking about your work in general. So this is for the creative community, but I did it for, it's applicable to all industries and anybody who is disrupting and working to make change and has, brilliant ideas to go out and speak, and not just in meetings and not just in events, but going out to meetings and just really practicing and participating and having conversations. So that was
great. Well, hopefully you can inspire and motivate us today as well. I could use some motivation today. I had a long day. Okay, so last but not least, Leo, I think your video is off, but is joining to represent Japan. Hi, Leo. I think you're on mute as well. Let me unmute you. Here we go.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So I'm running the Sparkdojo. So this is actually, one of the things I wanted to try by inviting people and friends from everywhere from the world. So it's a pleasure to have everyone here. So Tokyo is a bit slowed down in terms of running a business, and people are, talking about, some uncertainty and concerns in the future. So, I'm looking forward to share what's happening in Tokyo, also hearing what's happening in each country, by everyone.
Great, thank you very much, Leo. Okay, so let's get started with the discussions. And before I do that, let me just address the participants of this event. Feel free to send us chats. Feel free to ask questions throughout. We have so many people from very different countries represented. The theme of today, the topic might be COVID-19, but I think the theme that we want to sort of express today is cultural awareness, understanding other cultures, learning about different parts of the world, or learning about different regions and countries and how they, engage in problem solving when they come across issues like this. So please feel free to use the Q&A tool at the bottom or the chat tool at the bottom to send us questions throughout, or leave us comments so that I can check them and read them and share with the group as well. All right, okay, so shall we get started? It's very difficult to kind of start because there's just so many questions that I can ask and so many topics that we can discuss, but I just wanted to start off maybe a little bit lightly. So maybe if we can talk about us personally, how we were affected, or how have you personally been dealing with COVID-19, and how has it impacted your personal life or your work, the way you do work, or your business, your projects, and so on and so forth. If we can sort of just share our insights and experiences there, I think that would be a good start. Maybe Dominic, do you want to start? Let me unmute you. Here we go.
Yep, sure. For myself, I think this came, COVID-19 came at a time where my wife just gave birth to my second child. So I've got, we're on the circuit breaker thing with a 2-year-old and a 2-month-old at home. My wife and I have never spent this much time together. let alone with the kids.
Right.
So I think that is one of it's a challenge, but it's also, I'm kind of taking it personally as a good quality time to spend with the family. But I think
that's a positive way. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in terms of personal life, I think it changes the way, or it has changed the way you see relationships and you see how things were meant to be. So when you're running around doing sales outside, so in and out, and everyone just doesn't have enough time to spend together. Now you've got so much time to spend together,
Mm-hmm.
which is not necessarily a bad thing, but then I keep asking myself as well, is it a good thing? Can you have too much of a good thing? You know, so yeah, I think on a personal level, it has affected certain ways of thinking.
Right.
On
and
a
how
commercial level, or in terms of work, a lot has come to just webinars, and not really webinars, but online meetings, one-to-one meetings. So it certainly is very different, because when you meet someone in person, especially for the first time, you've got a lot of body language cues, which you can pick up and bounce off. With online meetings, that just isn't possible. It's just different, and it's also very different using a file versus using a PowerPoint presentation. Because you know, traditional Japanese company, I still use file and paper presentation. So yeah, but the main feedback that I have is, I think the feeling is that you want to get out there and go to meet people face to face and go back to the way things were. But of course, it's getting more apparent that we won't immediately, at least, go back to the way things were. So then the question is, where would it? Once everyone comes out of lockdown, what would the world look like in a post-19?
Yeah, that's definitely the $1,000,000 question.
I think that's what everyone.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So you were mentioning that you have so much more time spending with your family, that it's testing you, maybe some of your relationships a little bit. And also just, the way we communicate with people has changed a lot. But Bente, you were kind of laughing and chuckling when Dominique was mentioning that maybe there's a possibility that you can have too much of something good. But what do you think about that? Is that your experience too?
Well, yes, sort of. Well, I think the social lack, not seeing friends, not seeing families, that has impacted me a lot. Because we're used to be quite social after working hours, and especially because I have worked as a freelancer for almost 8, coming to 9 years, and I'm used to work from home. I have a home office, but all of a sudden my husband is also sharing the home office, so he had to stay at home. So all of a sudden I have to relate to that I was not the only one in the office. And we had meetings crossing over, so I actually have to move down to this living room here because he's having his meetings upstairs. And so I think from organizing my work, it hasn't been a huge difference for me. It has been a huge difference for my husband. But not being able to see my kids, not being able to see my family, my extended family, my old mother, I think that has probably impacted me from sort of a personal aspect more than I anticipated, because I actually felt I was fine, chatting with people on the phone. But then after 3 weeks, I start saying, okay, now I miss seeing people. And then we actually started arranging these virtual dinners.
Virtual dinners?
Yes, one incident, one situation that started it was my father-in-law. He was turning 75 years old. And normally we will celebrate him. We will join for a common dinner, the whole family, about 12 people, which was not possible, of course. And then, fortunately, in Denmark, many old people, now I say old people, elderly people, they actually have Skype, they have their laptop, they have an iPad, and so they're actually quite good off to installing Zoom or WebEx or Skype. So we arranged a virtual dinner where we actually bought the food for him, got it delivered to his house, and then we prepared the same food at home, and then a 2.5 hour common dinner together with the same menu, and just eating in each of our 3 homes. And that was in late March, and that initiated other of these situations where we invited our kids for a virtual dinner. That has certainly helped me to connect with families and friends in a much more intimate way than just having a chat on the phone.
Right, definitely. And I, as you say, you know, that human interaction, it's not even like I never used to really go outside so much and meet so many people all the time. But suddenly completely being unable to do that is kind of hindering. It's shocking to you as well. And it takes a toll on you, I think. So I'm glad you found a solution with this virtual dinners. I think I'm going to try that. I've tried virtual like drinking, but not dinners.
I've been used to virtual coffee breaks with the people at a distance. For example, my friends in Singapore, we quite often arrange a virtual coffee break together, and then we just have a chit chat for maybe 20 minutes. So that I'm used to, but this dinner thing was also new to me, but it was actually very nice.
Great. Okay. Wonderful. And maybe Michael, were you ever invited to Bente's online dinner, since you two are friends?
I'm sorry to say, but no, I haven't been invited yet, Bente.
No, but let's do that one.
Yeah, we need to catch up soon, anyhow. Yes.
How has everything impacted your personal life and professional life, Michael?
I think I mean, I can relate to both. I think the comments from Dominic and Bente on this. I mean, it's been a big change, of course, especially not seeing our families. That's been a big change, and we don't also not knowing exactly, when will we see them again. I think that's also the uncertainty there is of course. I think it's been in the beginning, there was a lot of uncertainty, but now we see, yes, Denmark have been impacted to some, or maybe a large extent. I don't know how to compare that really with other countries. But in the beginning, everything was probably a bit tense. But you can say now things have changed, how people behave, I think. But people also maybe a bit more relaxed and not so stressed about it. But surely it has changed a lot of things, both on the professional side, but also on the personal side. So it's given a lot of time at home with the family. We moved into a house last fall. There's been a lot of stuff to do, so I think timing wise that's been not too bad. It's given some opportunities, but also it's been pretty stressful. My girlfriend, she's a nurse, so she's been away quite a lot.
Really? Okay.
Yes. And then I've been those days I've been home with the kids, trying to manage work and taking care of a kid at the same time. It's also trying to be two places, not being any of those places really, I think is sometimes a challenge. So it's been really making the best use of 24 hours in the day for a period of time.
It's interesting you bring up that point, because this is just my impression. So Bente, Michael, you can correct me if I'm wrong, definitely please do. But my impression is that, in Denmark, there's a clear separation of work and life, and there's a clear sort of priority of family and personal life as well. Whereas maybe Japan, it's a little bit mixed. It tends to be mixed. Like a lot of people have dinners with their colleagues, and you have drinking parties with your colleagues as well and your clients. So personal life and work life is a lot more intertwined. Whereas my impression of Denmark is that there's a meaning that you need to keep them separated, so that you can sort of switch on and off and protect each. So if that is true, in that case, now that you're bringing work home, and you're kind of sort of mixing and intermingling your work life with your family life, and everything's just sort of like all in one area. Has that been a difficult thing to adjust to?
Do you want Bente or should I start?
Well, Michael, please.
Yeah, no, but for me, I think home working is not unusual in Denmark. So I think that part of it is quite normal. And so I think in Denmark, I guess a lot of people may not spend that many hours in the office as, for instance, in Japan. But people for quite a number of years, I would say, are used to working more from home. So maybe in the evening, people, and that may be good, that may be bad, but they may spend, 1-2 hours working because it fits. Then you have your time with your family after work and before the kids go to bed, and then you sit and work a little bit afterwards. So I think that part is nothing. There's nothing new to me in that. Now it's just been 100% work at home.
Yeah, it's just more.
But I think you're right about. I mean, Japan. There's a different culture there. That you go out for dinners and drinking parties and whatever not. We can do that in Denmark also, but I think it's to a much lesser extent.
Interesting.
But it's not as much a part of the culture, but it is certainly. But it would depend on the company and the people you're working with, and how the feeling and the atmosphere is. So I think it's less integrated in the culture for sure.
I see. Great. Okay. Great. Thank you. Go ahead, Bente.
Yeah, well, I can add to what Michael says about that people in Denmark, many people are used to have 1 day working from home. And I see many people during these pandemic times that they have actually felt that they are more productive because they don't have to get into the car, all the hassle going from A to B, as all the transportation and the logistics linked to the work. So some people, they feel that they are more effective, more productive at home if they don't have the children. So when we opened up slowly after Easter in Denmark, actually one of the first steps was to get the small kids into kindergarten, daycare, and the first, I think I can't remember, until 10 years old, they started school. So they have started, so they got out of the houses so people could actually concentrate on their work. And I think that was a huge relief for many families with small children.
Right, that is the challenge, balancing everything. Suddenly everything is here right now. Like this is your entire world, entire space. So that is definitely a challenge, I think, in any country.
But maybe Michael has some good tips and tricks how to keep the kids playing while he is having meetings.
Well, I'm not sure, but there was a little bit too much TV, I think, and then I must admit that after I handed in the kid in daycare, coming back home, it was just quiet for the first time in weeks, and that was kind of a blessing, to be honest.
Oh, see, now we are appreciative of things a lot more, I think. We're appreciative of silence, of our kids being cared for by other people.
We shouldn't be that, but sometimes it feels not too bad, huh?
That's life. Great. So maybe we can move on to Kyoko, who is also in Spain, in Europe, Southern Europe. So how has everything been affecting you, Kyoko? The lockdown has been lifted, right?
So actually, first I want to say Michael, Bente, Dominic, and everybody who has children, wow, hats off. I mean,
can't imagine.
I can't even imagine. I mean, I can imagine. So it's probably really testing your limits and understanding boundaries and how to separate time and work and personal and children. And so I can see that being a very big challenge. In terms of Barcelona, we just started the first phase. There's 4 phases where it's called the de-escalating phase or de-escalation phase. And what I hear on the news and what I see is people are not following rules.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So what is this phase 1? What is the rules for phase 1?
So just so you understand, it's very difficult to understand what it means to be in a complete lockdown. And when I say complete lockdown for 7 weeks, since I am not in, I'm not a doctor. I'm not working in any essential services. So I have basically been home. And there's some weeks in the worst weeks where there was about 900 or 1,000 people dying in hospitals. I probably went to the grocery store about once a week, maybe like once or twice a week. And when I say lockdown, you're home. There's nobody outside. You were technically supposed to fill out a form and say where you were going, just basically in terms of zip codes or areas, to say, okay, I live in this area and I'm going to go to this area, and you had to actually tick off what you were doing. So that's what was.
Is that for the police to check if you're stopped?
If you were stopped, you were supposed to like fill out this form, and I don't actually know how many people really filled it out. I was filling it out in the beginning, maybe for the first 3 weeks, and then and then I stopped. I stopped filling it out just because I forgot about it, and not for any other reason other than that. But it was basically to oblige people to stay home. Basically, they said, if you don't have this permission, then you are not supposed to be out, and they would have been able to fine you. So
they would have been able to fine you.
They would fine you.
Okay.
Depends on what you were doing. I don't know. I think it was something from a couple hundred to 1,000 euros or to 2,000 euros or something like that if you were caught breaking the rules and confinement. So we just started last week, and just for you to understand, so I think actually it was this Saturday. So 1 week ago, children were actually given the permission to walk outside, because during the confinement period, no children were allowed to go outside. Nobody. No, so you only saw adults going to supermarkets or pharmacies and things like that. So as an adult, you can go to any whatever to buy food and drugs or whatever you needed. If you need to go to the hospital, this wasn't a problem. But kids weren't outside. So last week they started to let children outside, and then this last Saturday they're letting adults go and exercise.
So when you say, sorry, Kyoko, can I clarify? When you say let them go outside, just like sort of outside on the balcony and that's it, or like outside to a park, or?
Sorry, so last week, and actually this week as well, children are allowed to go out with their parents as long as they're accompanied.
Okay, anywhere really, basically.
Sorry?
Anywhere, basically, anywhere, as long as they're accompanied by their parent.
So this is really not that clear, and they say something like a 1 mile radius or 1 kilometer radius or something like that.
From their home.
So yeah, that's technically it, but there's no real way to control it. And then they started different time periods. So in the morning from 6 to 10 a.m. and from the evening 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. adults are allowed to go outside and exercise. And then there's from 10 to 11 and from 7 to 8, for example, the most, it would be the older population are allowed to go outside. So they're actually splitting it up. So from the least vulnerable to the most vulnerable. But what I see is that people are not following those restrictions. At least, what I see, at least in terms of I'm following those restrictions because I don't want to get sick and I want to respect the time that other people have. So then during the day, for example, from 12 to 7, that's when children can go outside and they can go outside. The idea is that they're allowed to actually get sunlight and go for a walk, but that's not what they're doing. They're actually playing.
Right.
Outside. And this is phase 0. So it's starting phase 0 is that people can go outside and walk. Because there's a lot of people who have apartments that are really small. Maybe they don't have a lot of natural sunlight. And then, so the idea is supposed to be able to walk, but people are outside playing. You can see kids playing, people sitting on benches and drinking beers. So that's the reality.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like your life was impacted a lot dramatically due to the lockdown. And you said 7 weeks. So for an extended period of time, I think our participants, most of whom are from Japan and are living in Japan, it's really difficult for us to imagine, me included, to have to carry around a pass, to have to like wait for a certain time just to take a walk. Because just today outside, I looked outside and there's so many kids running around in my neighborhood. So it's very difficult to imagine. And thank you for that perspective. And lastly, Ajay, in Dubai, how have things affected you, your life, your work, your family?
I mean, it's pretty much the same which the previous panelists have said. It's working from home, kids and family being around, and then you're not getting to see your colleagues. And it may be difficult for us to adapt to, but it's been 5 weeks since we've been doing it, and now you're getting a hang of it. And then now you know, even if you're working from home, when you need to start on, when you need to switch off, because that urge of sending that last email out, contacting that last one more colleague out just before you close your laptop, that urge you need to control so that you know when do you switch on, when do you switch off. How do you make sure that you get, how do you make sure that the collaboration between your team still exists? How the communication, because if you have a team working for you, how the communication from top down should flow, because it's easier when you see people together. But
definitely, yeah.
I wouldn't say that we have all, me or my team have all mastered it, but we are learning it. We are learning it in a better way, and that's probably the silver lining here, that it's been imposed on us. But since it's been imposed on us, now we're working towards it. I mean, we always have, otherwise the option of working from home was always existing, but we would still probably, because that's the habit we have had, that let's go to office and just finish this stuff over there. Otherwise this option always existed, but we wouldn't take it.
Yeah.
On the personal front,
Go ahead.
On the personal front, it's pretty much the same which everybody said, not getting to see your friends. I went out last week for the first time after like 5 weeks. Just took a drive around in my car, even in the confines of my car, and came back. Everything is being ordered online, all the essentials are, though the lockdown has been lifted, but still, I mean, I do not see many people on the road. They are actually taking precautions. And this is more important now because, this is more important now in Middle East because it's the holy month of Ramadan for Muslims who fast during this month. And then after fasting, the tradition says that you go and meet your friends and families and extended family, and which they are trying to avoid at least. The government has set up some guidelines for you to do that. And I believe people are following it because I don't see as many people even when the lockdown has been removed. So that's a bit challenging, but I think one thing for us is the summers are here very hot. Unlike Europe where you want to go out in the sun, we actually prefer to stay inside when it's summer. So it's not an extra effort from our end. Probably not as much extra effort from our end as probably is for you guys back in Europe.
Great. You mentioned that the 5 week lockdown was just lifted, you said?
No, it was a lockdown for 3 weeks. And I just didn't leave my home for it's just been lifted like 2 weeks, 1.5 weeks ago.
Okay. Was it a complete lockdown?
It was, I would say, almost a complete lockdown. Only the essential services were allowed, and you could leave your home. But as just Kyoko said, you needed a permit. You should always have it with you. You can be flagged down by any cop on the road, and he can ask you to show the permit for you to be out. And once you've been out, let's say for grocery, you cannot go out for another 3 days. So you should be shopping for at least 3 days supplies.
Again, difficult for us to imagine here in Japan. But you also mentioned an interesting point about Ramadan. So it is this month until the end of May, I believe, right? End of May, third week?
Until last week of May, 23rd week.
Okay, so you mentioned that the government has provided guidelines as to how people should, abide by rules while still celebrating Ramadan. But what are some of the guidelines? Like, what can you do really but stay at home?
Yeah, exactly. So the reason I said that guideline, they're not rules because you cannot really enforce them to the last T, but like they've said when you're meeting for this family feast, try to avoid not to go to the homes where elderly people are living. And if you're there, generally it would be like 4 or 5 families for them. But just keep it to 2 families, even if you want to. And then even if you want to travel, just make sure that if you have 2 cars, take 2 cars out. Don't crowd everybody in single car. And they're not saying don't do it. All they're saying is do it with much of caution.
Great. Thank you very much for that insight. Thank you. Okay. Maybe Leo, you can also update everyone or represent all of the participants here to share a little bit of what Japan has been going through.
Yeah, sure. So Tokyo didn't go complete lockdown, but the government actually asked people to stay home. So for me, it's super unusual to see so few people in downtown. Also, almost no people on train. So, but at least, people following the rule or, guideline without a specific penalty, etc. But as Michael mentioned that in Denmark, there has been a clear separation between private life and work life. But in Japan, a significant change in that, people usually, especially business people, work from early morning until late in the office, but now many people, business people, are asked to stay at home. So the one good thing is that people have more luxury time, for their private, also with family they're supposed to have. But at the same time, a lot of people are confused to think about how to spend their time at home because they have been spending so many years spending their time in the office with colleagues and at the drinking bar with colleagues and not so much time experienced with friends and family. So it's kind of strange that people are quite confused. But this is also giving us a dramatic opportunity for people to make a digital transformation. So even like in the big companies and also small companies like us, we shifted from offline based business to online business. A lot of companies are trying to change and then start asking, do we really need existing operation processes? So yeah, so I think in the remote work, working from home has not been the common practice in Japan for many companies, but it will be one of the common practice for Japan. So this is going to be quite positive.
Yes, absolutely. As many of the panelists also said, Japan was kind of forced into adopting new practices, new policies, and new working styles. And I think there is some positive impact to that. And thank you very much, Leo. We are also joined by David. David is joining from Israel. Hello, David. Okay, let me unmute you. Hi, David. How are you doing?
Hi, excellent. I have been on the call all the time.
Yes, you.
And thank everybody very much for all your comments. I was just promoted to a panelist by Leo. Thank you very much, Leo.
We had invited you as a panelist, but there were some Zoom issues, but we were able to promote you to panelist.
Anyway, it's good to be with everybody.
It's good to have you, sir.
So
do you mind if I just read
from Jerusalem in Israel?
Yes, thank you. You are joining from Jerusalem in Israel, and David has been responsible. I'm just reading your profile, David, so that our viewers know who you are. David has been responsible for leading sales strategy and execution for Israeli high technology companies for over 20 years, and currently is the VP of Asia at Innoviz Technologies. He was born in London and moved to Israel when he was 18 years old, and currently, as you have said already, live in Jerusalem. But we were just discussing, David, about how COVID-19 has impacted our personal lives. But what about Israel, and what about your life in Israel in terms of personal life and professional life? How was it impacted?
So in terms of personal life, there has not been a huge impact. However, my son and his wife were traveling in New Zealand, and they had to come back to Israel because New Zealand, all the parks and attractions were closed, so they came back to Israel, and they're now staying with us, which is a very nice surprise for us.
Oh.
My wife is a psychologist. Finally, I understand what she does for a living because she's doing her sessions on Zoom. I'm not listening, but I get the general idea.
Right. You see how she works, not necessarily the appointments themselves, but.
Right.
Wow, okay.
For me, and for many people in Israel, it's been very interesting to try to understand the balance between personal safety and, from a health perspective, and work, the economy, what is isolation doing to people's livings? In other words, just for example, 26% of the population is now unemployed. It was 4%.
26%, my God.
It's gone up to 26%. In the United States, it's about 16% currently. People are saying, okay, it's all very well, you're keeping us indoors, but we're losing our livelihoods. And for some people, for the, if you like, the lower strata of society, this is very critical. They don't have food. They don't have food, and this is becoming a big problem.
Right, yeah, definitely. And in a country like the US too, which is where I'm from, you know, there's a severe gap in terms of wealth, and the impact is very, very serious and severe for those who are in sort of lower socioeconomic positions in life. So in terms of that, how the government should, you know, provide funding and financial aid to certain segments of the population, what are the criteria for that is also very ambiguous. In Japan, it was just recently decided to provide the same amount to everyone who requested in Japan, regardless of wealth. So that is what Japan is taking in terms of approach for financial aid for its citizenry. But how about in other countries? How have the governments in your country responded to this and sort of provided financial aid or financial support to businesses or citizens? Maybe in Spain, Kyoko, do you know?
In Spain, what they have been doing is something called the ERTE, which is a temporary, what would it be?
Loan?
It's under, they said special circumstances, right? They said out of God's hands, or, you know, so the special circumstance where companies can apply for, to base, if they're earning something like less than, if they could demonstrate that they're earning less than a certain percentage, I forgot exactly what the details are, the employees can get a temporary unemployment. However, does that make sense? So
yes,
it's not a typical situation where the company is about to go under and bankrupt. It's just a circumstance that, for example, restaurants to bars, they have a lot of people working for them. And so these companies can solicit and submit go through the process of getting funding from the government so they can get this temporary unemployment. But there's actually a pretty big issue with that, because now the process of getting accepted into that program is taking time. So then people are not being paid. And they also, I'm a freelancer. So one of the things that freelancers can do is that if they can demonstrate that they're earning a lot less than what they're normally earning, then they can also apply for some sort of aid. But in terms of what I understand, there isn't actually, you know, some sort of check like the US or Japan is doing, where you get like a lump sum or a specific sum that everybody gets. This is not something that is happening here.
Yeah, it must be so hard for government officials as well. It's kind of like this is a pandemic that is unprecedented in terms of the impact across the world and to each of these countries. So how the government responds is also being closely watched, which is another area of concern as well. But Ajay, for example, in Dubai, you know, in terms of like gaps in wealth between the wealthy and the poor, I would say Dubai also has a pretty significant gap in terms of wealth and distribution of wealth. But how has the government been responding to supporting citizens who require financial aid?
So what government has done is basically they have actually started, the central government has come up with some stimulus packages for the industry. They've cut down the interest rate, which is anyway lower because they match it up to US interest rates anyway because of the currency peg. So they have reduced that down. And then what they have done is they reduce a couple of municipality fees for the local population. They've cut down on utility prices for next 3 months. schools have voluntarily agreed to reduce their next term's school fees for the parents, whether or not you're impacted or whether or not you need it. They have just gone to do it across the board. And then what they also have done is that, as you know, most of the population here, at least 85% of the population is of the expats who work here on their work visa. So the rules were like, if you lose your job because of any reason, and in this case, because of the economic reasons coming out of COVID impact, you were supposed to either find a new job or you were supposed to go back to your home country before you get another job. They've eased those rules. You can stay here for until end of this year, even if you lose job, so that you can look for another job. So they have actually gone much beyond. And again, I would say these changes were coming in this part of the world, but because of the COVID, those changes have been accelerated faster. And that's what government is doing on its own part.
Would you say that so the impact on unemployment rate is not as high as in maybe Israel or the US?
No, I cannot say that because the data which comes out is not as clear on this one. So I wouldn't have a data to reference it to. But what I would say that they have anticipated it, that they're going to be an impact. And then they're providing for it, so that how can they support people who get affected by it. What that percentage is, I wouldn't know.
Great. Okay, that was fascinating, very interesting. And Dominic, as well, we were just talking about sort of like the government response in terms of providing financial aid to those who require that sort of financial assistance. But how has the Singaporean government been handling this?
It's been quite interesting because, as you may or may not know, Singapore is fiercely family support first, and then your community support before the government steps in. The policy has been very clear, has been very anti-welfare, anti-handout. But this time, I think they've set aside something to the tune of 46 billion Singapore dollars to support mainly small businesses. Of course, small businesses make up the bulk of the people who would require support. So even like for myself, I hire an assistant who helps me with everything. She's working from home, so of course her salary still needs to get paid. Unfortunately, we're not able to do the same amount of sales that we would be able to do on a normal basis due to a lot of different circumstances. So they're supporting a percentage of her salary, just using that as an example, but a very small portion of, I think, about between 25%, an average about 25 to about 35%, once you even everything out for the next, I think up till November or December. So at the end of the day, it's not even going to be half of your employee salary that the government covers, but it's gonna, it's gonna go towards something. And I think they have been trying to work at trying to alleviate the pain such that you wouldn't have to lay off your staff next month, but you'd have to keep thinking of how you're gonna I don't know if innovate is the right word, but to adjust models to bring in. So I think at the end of the day, some businesses will be affected because you just can't adapt, or circumstances is just such. But and those are the businesses which I think I personally am quite worried about, because they are going to go down, and with them, employment is going to go down as well. But that remains to be seen, because if I had to sum it up in one sentence, I think the government has been doing a pretty alright job at just kicking the bucket down the road to see if the whole situation can pick itself up or not.
That's a good metaphor.
Yeah, we get the impression that if things really don't pick up, I think the government might still have some ammunition, or bazookas as they call it now, to put in place. So yeah, we're kind of filled with that hope. I hope that hope isn't fake. But yeah, that's the situation now. So, oh yeah, I forgot. Every person gets a $300 handout, or we've already gotten a handout just last month. Obviously, that's not
300 Singaporean dollars.
Yeah.
How much would that be for like US dollars?
I think it's about 1.3, 1.4. So if you divide that up to 230, I think.
Okay, that's not very much.
No.
A month's worth of groceries.
Yeah. So yeah, it's better than nothing, I think. So,
yes, definitely.
Yeah. So it's like I said just now. If you can cover 1 month's groceries, that's better than nothing at all. So you kick the damn thing down the road again. You know what I mean?
Until you hit something. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Before we continue though, Ajay, I think you have to leave in a few minutes or 1 or 2 minutes, right? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much for joining.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Yeah, and it was good listening to other panelists as well.
Yeah, I know it's interesting.
Remainder of the panel.
Thank you. Thank you. It was interesting to hear your insights.
Thank you, Ajay.
Thank you. Goodbye. Great. Okay. And lastly, Denmark, Bente, Michael, any sort of government support that you're getting, how the government has been handling this issue in terms of finances or financial support?
I think from the government side, they were quite fast in initiating some helping package for the small businesses and startups and freelancers like myself. If we got this package where we could get some money if we could prove that we had an increase of minimum 30% of our income. If we have lost that, then we could apply for this support. And then we also had, I think that there were some other initiatives. Michael, can you help me here? Oh yeah, by the way, the companies that had really had a slowdown in their income and they couldn't sell their products, they, instead of laying people off, they can ask people to go home and not work, and then the government support their salaries, but they are not allowed to work. So, but they got this confirmation that they are not being fired, they're not being laid off. So, and then recently but that is actually not from the government. I hear more and more big companies where they ask people to decrease their salaries, and then they don't work on Fridays, for example, or they typically it's they ask for 10-20% decrease of salaries, and then they promise not to fire people.
I see. Okay, great.
No, but I think what Bent is explaining is right. I think overall the approach taken in Denmark is probably pretty expensive, because there is a lot of support to companies, to all sort of companies, basically covering the salary to a very large extent, of course, in exchange for a guarantee that people will not be laid off. But I think you can also see it in the unemployment numbers, because that number has increased, of course, significantly. I wasn't aware of the number in Israel, but that's really, really high. So I think in Denmark, probably before this, the unemployment level was probably around 4 to 5%. And I think now it's probably 7 or something like that. So it's increased, and I mean the increase in percent from 4.5 to 7 is of course a lot. But what we see in other countries, it's nothing near this. And that is really due to government support to, I think, mainly you can say the food service sector, so restaurants and so on, and hotels.
Right.
Yeah.
Because they don't have any guests, and if they would not be getting this support, of course, we would have seen massive layoffs in these industries.
Yes.
I feel like it must. What a decision to make as, you know, a government official or a leader of a country as to how to handle this pandemic, because we've seen so many different countries respond in so many different ways. And you know, Phyllis, who is from Taiwan, was supposed to join us today. She has some connection trouble and was unable to join, but she was going to tell us about, you know, Taiwan's quick response in terms of closing its borders, especially closing travel from China, and getting everyone inside, containing people into their home, getting everyone tested. Their response was rapid. And I would say that is probably one of the more successful cases. But this relationship between the government and the people, people's attitudes toward the government, the trust toward government, I think also impact the way the government has, responded to. But in that sense, maybe David, you can speak about Israel specifically, because I believe didn't Israel start to monitor infected people's sort of phones and monitor their movement so that they're not moving around, or is that?
What Israel did was they instituted a policy of surveillance so that they knew where everybody's cell phone is. Now, this is tricky from a number of different points of view. First of all, obviously privacy issues, and it's a slippery road because, it can lead to worse things. The justification, of course, was to say, okay, we know this person has the virus. We know they have left their place. They've left where they are being isolated. And we now know that they are near these people. We have to tell these people, you've been near somebody with the virus, you should self-isolate, and so on and so on. There have been a number of interesting things happening in Israel, because Israel has had some political problems for a long time. We've actually had 3 elections, one after the other, because we haven't managed to make a government.
Right.
And the prime minister is also being indicted for corruption charges. And he's a kind of a magician. Everybody respects him because he's a very wily politician. And when the COVID-19 virus appeared, it seemed obvious that the country had to be closed down. Now, his trial was supposed to be on Wednesday. And on Monday, he shut down the law courts. And some people say that's more than a coincidence. But actually, in actual fact, I think it was just part of closing down the country. But a lot of political shenanigans have been going on. And the people are engaged in a very vociferous debate, about how the government has handled it. For sure, they've made a few mistakes. The one mistake that they made was not looking after the people in the old age homes. And this is a mistake that went on for too long. Another mistake was there was no clear policy for the people coming back from other countries. That they were allowed into the country without being forced to isolate themselves. And another mistake was something which is perhaps very individual for Israel and very, very particular. We have some communities which are kind of special communities, like the ultra-Orthodox Jews. And they have a very high incidence of being infected with the virus because they live in very big families in a very crowded environment. They're usually very poor communities. And they have nowhere to go to isolate themselves. And they want to pray together. They don't want to be separated for the prayer time. So some of the worst hit areas were the ultra-Orthodox. Now they listen to their spiritual leaders, to the rabbis. So the government had to talk to the rabbis and tell the rabbis, listen, you have to tell your people the most important commandment from God is to take care of yourself, of your life. And then finally they listened and they no longer pray with at least 10 men together. It took time. So this was a particular problem in Israel. And there have been some other problems. The testing has been a big issue, that we really messed up the testing. But on the whole, Israel has done a good job with controlling the virus. And actually the statistics are quite good because most people listened to the lockdown and most people followed the rules.
I think it's interesting what you say about how information was communicated from the government to the people, to every person in Israel. And that sort of communication system sometimes involved mediators in between, especially like for religious sects or groups, having rabbis mediate or religious leaders mediate and then reach out to masses. There's a strategy involved in communicating during a pandemic, I think, on the government side too. And, you know, Phyllis from Taiwan, who is supposed to join us, was telling us that, you know, in the case of Taiwan, they experienced SARS in 2003. So the government and the country came up with a game plan in terms of communication to the people, how exactly they're going to use it, how they're going to use text messages, emails, and sort of like communication sort of paths. They laid everything out so they were so ready for this pandemic. Whereas Japan, I think, struggled a little bit with communicating with the people, still struggles to this day to keep people inside. So in terms of this communication aspect, how have your countries been handling this? How have they been communicating with you or with the citizens of your country? Maybe Kyoko?
Sorry, it got cut out again. Can you just repeat the question again?
Sure. So we were talking about how governments communicate with their people in terms of how, you know, safety precautions, guidelines, what they should do, what they cannot do, what are the implications of not following the orders, if any. So in terms of Spain, how did the government or, you know, authorities, officials communicate with you? How did you get the information?
Basically, the television, news, sure, social media, basically these typical channels of getting information. One of the things that has been interesting that I have seen is that Spain, so the national power, so Spain, there's one central government, right? But then there's 17 autonomous regions in Spain. So it works as states, and there's also a president. In Catalonia, there's a president. And it was interesting to see kind of the two powers having different views. So for example, the Catalan government, the president wanted to close the borders earlier, or they had different ideas of what de-escalation meant in terms of the subsidies. And then I think what we have seen and what I understand and me not being anything in politics but just watching world news, I think that Spain did the right thing, which is they have to be one central idea, because what ended up happening is that every area would have something different. Right? So I think in Tokyo, what they did was, okay, and if you live in Tokyo, then you have to stay in that area. But if you live in the other areas, then you can move around. That's what was happening, right? About 4 weeks long ago. Time is a little bit different right now. So in Spain, that's what happened, is that there's different regions, and in each region they have different, you know, it's kind of like states in the US. So they have also kind of local laws that they have, and they have certain powers. And it was very interesting to see that there was a conflict in terms of the way that each region wanted to deal with the situation. And that was kind of confusing in the beginning. But now, you know, it's not that it's just the government, Spain, the national government is basically deciding what the situation is, and then each region, for example, there's in the Canary Islands, for example, they don't have many cases, so then they have different rules at the moment because they're in isolation and they've contained the virus in that area. So depending on where you live and what the situation is, then the rules are different. So Barcelona is still bad. In Madrid, it's bad, which means that we'll probably be the last to actually finish the phases. There's 4 phases, and every 2 weeks they change it, which means that they every week, for example, in the next phase, and certain companies will be able to go back to work. They have the option of doing that. For example, this week, before you could only be in a car, 1 person, and now you can actually have up to 2 people in the car. So there's just all these different levels and lots of rules. It's slightly confusing. I think people are partially following, lots of people who aren't, and it's mainly, I think it's very difficult to control it.
Yeah, definitely. And COVID has, we were just talking about how it has disrupted, existing markets and businesses and financial orders. It's also, I think, really putting strains on, excuse me, existing like political networks and, power balances as well. Like in the case of Israel, maybe Netanyahu is using this opportunity to amass his power and maybe get free. And then in other areas, leaders are starting to crumble in terms of their leadership too. So that has been interesting to watch. But maybe Leo, you can also mention Japan's side in terms of, financial aid to companies, to mid-sized companies and small companies, and to people as well.
Yeah, Japan and the government actually announced that they are going to support individuals for everyone, no exceptions, for entire people in Japan, and they are going to start the process to distribute the people who applied for this process. Also, they're also going to give some financial support for small company, mid company, because a lot of shops are closed. And this has been probably the first time that the government asked to stop their operations. The only challenge is that I don't think Japan is the country with the completely centralized system to monitor or control individuals and financial flow, or who are in this which situation. So I know how this is monitored in Denmark. So probably the government has better idea to comprehend people's move, financial transaction. But so the process still needs to be depend on a lot of manual work. So that workload is quite heavy for the government side. But in terms of communication, I think as long as I remember, I don't think this is the best yet, but I think this has been the one of the best or clearest communication that's been done from the Prime Minister of Mr. Abe, also the governor of each prefectures, so that they are doing a live stream using YouTube, and they allow some people to ask questions, and then they spend time to explain with figures and statistics. So compared to Taiwan, they are doing a lot of systematic follow-up by asking input from people. So we're still not the best, but at least this has been the clearest communication coming from the government.
Yeah, great, thank you. There has been a lot of major systemic changes in the government and financial world and every sort of industry in Japan and probably elsewhere too. But if we take a more positive approach, then a lot of new ideas as well. Like Sparkdojo, we never thought about doing something like this, but we were always capable of doing this, but we just never had that sort of impetus to. And now we are just challenging new things. And I think this can be said for many different industries in many different countries. So thinking positively too. Okay, so we are getting some questions from some of the participants. So I'm just gonna scroll back, and maybe I can open it up for the group. So Iwanaga-san is asking, I'd like to know what kind of new markets all of the panelists think will be created after COVID-19. Any new markets, any new sort of endeavors after COVID-19 that you can think of? Any new business trends? Please jump in if you have any thoughts about this.
I think that's an interesting question. I think whoever has the answer, if you get it right, I think you'll be the world's next top billionaire or something. But I personally think my money would be on hygiene compliance. So just like after 9/11, I think the face of travel, travel in general has changed. Your metal detectors, your security, I think was ramped up quite a bit after that, and it's become the new normal. I think hygiene compliance, yeah. I don't know how, but hygiene compliance.
Yeah, I mean, COVID-19 isn't as, SARS happened, but it wasn't as nearly as, impactful across the world as COVID-19 has been. So this is definitely a year to be remembered. And as you say, just like 9/11, it will probably, instigate a lot of radical changes in many different industries, including maybe hygiene products. David, were you going to say something?
I think that an area which I'm quite close to will develop very quickly, and that is autonomous delivery.
What do you mean by that?
I'm thinking mostly of those little autonomous trucks that run around with no driver. They're using all sorts of very advanced sensors, and they're basically ready. And the government needs to approve them in many countries. But companies like Neolix in China, Amazon, Nuro, JD.com, Meituan, this kind of company are definitely going there. And I think this could become a business with hundreds of thousands of units in China within a few years, but also in the States and in Europe. Anywhere there are big cities.
Definitely. And this is your specialty too, isn't it, David?
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So that is very convincing. Leo, yes? Did you want
to so I think, David, you made interesting points that the technology is ready. So that means that we also see some technology and services, namely remote medical services, for example. So capability-wise, that's there. But due to some, legal restrictions, and the business was not ready to go. But so anything that capability is ready, product is ready, and service is ready, concept is there. But due to the legal constraints, that was not in the market, could be facing the big opportunities. So just using that ideas and put it into the market and help people to go back to normal life.
Great, excellent. Yeah, we just had an interview event as well in the afternoon with one of the head of an accelerator in Japan, and he was talking about, you can't read the future. It's impossible now. It's so uncertain. There's no point in trying to project anything about the future. So all you can do right now is just invent your own future and hope that it works. So just act, do it, take risks right now. This is the only time you can do it, actually do it. So I think that just reminded me of his words today. Okay, so a question by David Oberman to the panelists. So David has a question. Do you think our countries should have used the same strong clampdown as China? So this, I guess, goes back to a little bit of the relationship between the government and the people, the culture, the political culture that exists in each country. But what do you all think? Do you think your country should have used the same sort of stronghold, severe lockdown, control of borders, control of, everything essentially, as China did?
I can try to give some input on this. I mean, it's not an easy question to answer, of course, and I think also it will vary with what are basically the opportunities in the different countries. If I talk about Denmark, first of all, I don't know exactly what has happened in China, and I guess with all the discussions ongoing, we don't know maybe the real impact in China. Of this, how big has it been? And I don't know, of course, all the measures that they have taken. But I think in Denmark, I think it's we've never gone to what I would call a complete lockdown. But people have been working from home, and a lot of shopping malls and so on have been closed. So you can say mainly the shops open have been supermarkets, pharmacies, but also all kinds of other shops that are not located in shopping malls and so on. We've closed the borders to all countries except Sweden. I guess you could basically still go to Sweden, and if you come back from Sweden, then you will still be let in. So I think a lot of measures have been taken, and we've tried to. I think police have try to manage it in probably a typical Danish way, without handing in a fine the moment they see something wrong. But speaking to the reason or the sense of people. So I think that's probably a more classic way of trying to manage it in Denmark. And I think it would be, I'm not sure it would work very well if you go the same way as China.
So you just said an interesting phrase. So speaking to the reason and the sense of the people, and I think it works in Denmark because a majority, if not all, of your population are sensible, practical people. But how can you know that your entire country will react in that way?
You know that everybody will not react in that way, but that's part of the price for it. I think so. So you will know. I mean, we've had fantastic weather in Copenhagen after 6 months of rain in April, right? So April was a great month, and people will go out. So and that's been one of the concerns, but I think it was still managed in a decent way. But you know that there will be some people not living up to the recommendations, basically.
And you accept that, so you won't sacrifice, your freedoms and your right to go outside and for just some bad apples who might not follow the rules, right?
Oh, but I believe that's my belief in this case. In Denmark, it's probably, let's say, 98% of the population who follow relatively, the guidelines, and you have a few percentages where they are, but then I guess we will manage it somehow.
Yeah, which is amazing, and it harks back to your and Bente's explanations about how financially supportive the government has been. So maybe the people feel as though they have trust in the government and are more willing to abide by any of the guidelines, and also probably just cultural, as you said, operating on reason and sort of practical logic. Don't go outside. That's very reasonable because of this pandemic. So that's interesting.
I can add to here that during this COVID time, I have been working on a project where there have been quite a few Italians joining the project, and of course we have talked a lot about what measures we're taking in Italy, especially in near Milan where they're staying, and there was a huge difference. And I think if we have experienced the same in Denmark, that our prime minister have told us not to go out, that has been a huge attack on our freedom. But we didn't reach that stage. We did other measures in Denmark, and one of the Italian guys, he said, but you're always following the rules. So when there is a red light across the street, we stop up, even though it's 2:00 in the night, we don't cross the street. So, and I think that mindset has definitely helped this closing down in Denmark. But of course, there will always be a few people who don't think that they are part of this group culture. But it has been quite interesting to see the difference, because he, from an Italian perspective, said that they had to do this in Italy because people are not obeying or maybe trusting the government to the same extent as in Denmark.
Interesting. This has been fascinating. Maybe, David, this means that maybe it worked in China, the China model, but maybe not necessarily, because even in Israel, the mobile phone tracking has caused a lot of controversy and, protests. So I'd imagine that the China style won't really work in Israel either, right?
Yeah, you're right. But when I look at the numbers and the statistics, even if the Chinese have not given us all the numbers, it's still very low relative to other countries. And we all had time to react. At first, we thought it was a Chinese problem, and then suddenly it became our problem. But we did have time to prepare. And it just makes me think, if we had been prepared to act the same way as China to stop it as soon as possible, then maybe a lot less people would have died. And of course, you know, we're not dictatorships, we're not communist countries, you know, and so on. And this is, you know, the good thing of democracy, but on the other hand, maybe this is a bad aspect in that the governments cannot control the people for their own safety.
Right. Yeah, at the very least, what we can hope for is that this does spur some changes in terms of, you know, strategizing or making plans for the case of emergencies like this. What are the communication plans? What are the sort of financial aid plans, subsidy plans, and so on? This will maybe be an impetus for starting to draw a blueprint for future emergencies too. Okay, great. And we have a question from an anonymous attendee. How does your country broadcast about Japan? Is I think the question that he or she is trying to ask. So how does your country maybe view Japan? So Japan has famously had very low infection numbers and low death rate as well. And, you know, there has been a lot of theories, like it's the culture of, you know, not really hugging or kissing or touching. Also, Japanese people are very used to wearing masks outside. And there was never an aversion to, like, you know, maintaining proper hygiene practices or wearing masks if you're feeling a little bit sick. So those are some viable reasons, but from your perspective, based on any sort of media coverage that you've read or heard or watched, what is your impression of Japan and how Japan has been dealing with this pandemic? No impression. Okay, David.
So I think that there are two things to mention here. Number one is that Japan and the rest of Asia have always used masks, and they're used to using masks. And the rest of the world really doesn't like using masks, and we're not prepared to accept it very quickly. Now it's coming in. So this is one reason, I think, you know, for Japan having a much better response. And the other thing is that I think that Japanese people are much more disciplined in general. You know, when you grow up, people say to you, "Deru kogi wa utareru." You know, if you stick out there, you'll be hammered down. This is exactly the opposite of Israel. So you see a lot of very irresponsible people in Israel going around. You go out now, you know, you can see them in the streets not wearing masks, even though they should be. And I think this is, you know, another very big reason why Japan has done much better.
Interesting, interesting. I forgot that, David, you spent some time at Hokkaido University in Japan, right? So your Japanese was great. Okay, yeah, I think that is true. I think just the hygiene quality and like the standard of hygiene has been very high in Japan to begin with. And Japan has also, you know, not as much as China or Hong Kong, but has been affected by the SARS pandemic in 2003. So I think there was that awareness to begin with, which might have helped. Okay, so we have one last question. Do you have any problem with the medical system in your country? For example, we in Japan have a problem that some hospitals deny accepting normal patients because they don't know if the patients are infected by the virus or not. And just for risk mitigation, they just don't accept anyone who has any symptoms that may be COVID-19. So do you have any similar problems or any sort of constraints on your medical system in your country? This is a question from Tomoyuki.
I can
Yes, Michael.
Maybe add a little. I mean, in Denmark, I think the response from the authorities was to really limit other procedures and non-COVID issues for a period of time, because they believed that now we would get a huge influx of COVID patients. So they had prepared for, I think, around 1,000 to 1,500 people in Denmark in intensive care units. But in fact, the number has never really exceeded much more than 100. But they had really prepared the system, or starting to prepare everything to take in a lot of patients. And that meant also closing down both in the public hospitals, which is majority in Denmark, but also they closed down entirely the private hospital sector in Denmark. And then later on, they learned that they were actually not entitled to close down the private sector. So that opened up again, and the public hospitals are also running, I would say, maybe not 100% normal, but it's back up and running. So I think we've seen the same here also. And I think also a reaction from the public has been that people have been more reluctant in calling the doctor if they had symptoms of other things. So for cancer, potential cancer patients and so on, they have simply been scared also that people, because of this, they would be afraid of actually reaching out and saying, oh, I need an appointment to get checked. So I think that's been some of the consequences. I believe it's being addressed now, but I don't know if it's been solved. But so you can say, moving such a big focus to just one thing and then leaving everything else in the background. So I think it's been very visible actually in this system.
Right, that's interesting. People are avoiding actually even calling their doctors or their local clinics out of fear that they would have to go to the clinic and potentially get the virus. Is that?
Yeah, that's one thing, and also fearing that there would not be time for it for them basically, because they would be too occupied with other things.
Right.
So I guess it's two things in this.
Yes, yeah. As you say, if you bring one thing to the forefront so much, then of course all other things sort of fade into the background and become sort of a secondary priority. That is interesting. A little bit different from Japan. But maybe Dominique, Kyoko, Spain, Singapore, what has the medical situation been like in your country?
It's quite interesting because this week I've been to the hospital twice, and I'll be going again on Friday because my 2-year-old scalded his hand.
I'm sorry.
So I had to rush him. It's a good learning experience for him not to hold my coffee anymore. It was quite interesting to see firsthand that first and foremost, the public hospital that I went to, I had the impression that they probably wouldn't be receiving any potential COVID-19 patients or potential patients. So once you go there, they've got very strict measures on one patient can only have one accompanying parent or an accompanying person. So there are a lot of restrictions in place, contact tracing, whether they let you in or not. Of course, they're going to let you in eventually, but they're not going to let your whole village go in together with one child.
Right.
So I think from the very start of, or at least for the past month or month and a half, the government has been broadcasting the philosophy that we should be interacting with every single person as if each of these people is a potential COVID carrier, because it's asymptomatic. You don't know. So we've seen this stepped up quite a bit at the hospitals, sometimes to an annoying extent, because like yesterday we had my wife and my second son had to stay in the car in the hospital while I went up together for another checkup, So one of those things. So when I brought the other child up, then they were asking, okay, he's actually not a patient, so what's he doing here? And all these things. But I think it's necessary now just to get all the numbers of infections down, and so we mitigate the risk there. So to answer the question, no, I don't think people are avoiding. Of course, you would not want to go to the hospital for any normal cough and cold if you can help it at all. But for the A&E, the emergency department, which I've just been this week, it seems like it's business as usual with precautions, and I think it's running fine. So I don't think we face any problems.
Great. Yeah, as you say, it does seem excessive at times and maybe too extreme at times as well, these precautions, but they are necessary. We just have to keep on believing that they are necessary and trusting in medical professionals and officials. Great. Okay. So I'm sorry, it is 9:35 in Japan time, so we're 5 minutes over the time that we did say that we will be running this event to. And I know you must all be busy with your work, and we're in different time zones as well. I think I'll stay for a little bit, but if you must leave, please do so freely. thank you so much for joining. And if you are available to just hang out maybe for another 1 or 2 more questions, then that's completely great as well. But I didn't want to keep you if you have other appointments and commitments. So
I've got to get to the boys, so you guys have fun.
Yes.
Thank you so much for having me.
Please do get to your boys. Congratulations.
Same for me. I need to go also and pick up the kid now. So
yes, please do. Please
thanks for the invitation.
Thank you.
Nice to talk to you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Dominic.
Thank you, Michael.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dominic.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. Okay, great. So, okay. Bye, David. Okay, so I think there was just 1 or 2 more questions, Bente, if we can get your insight as well. So from Sayaka, I'd like to ask your opinion about education in this situation. I think the educational gap has already begun. Are there any measures in your country? And for parents, do you have any education that you've newly started for your children? So Bente, in terms of Japan, the schools have been closed down and they're talking about, extending that until September. But in Denmark, what has the education system, how has it been impacted, and what has the government been doing to ensure that children are being educated?
That's actually a very good question, because right now in these days they are talking about opening up for the teenagers. I mean, for the middle school and above, and high school is probably one of the critical ones because they need the exams in order to enter universities. So that whole process is going into a critical phase because the time of the year. The government have asked all schools to continue to convert classroom training to online training. So all children who can read and write and who are able to open a computer, they have had online classes. And the universities, they have converted also lecturers to online classes using Zoom, using different devices. So in that respect, they have been able to continue some learning, but of course be a learning gap some way or the other, because I hear from many parents that it's really challenging to keep the kids motivated at home during those classes and to do their homework, because you actually need to be quite old before you are mature enough to take responsibility for your own learning. So you could say the education gap is not that big in Denmark due to these measures that everyone had a laptop, they were connected, they had internet connections. So that of course it helps.
Right. So in terms of, maybe Leo, you can also speak to this since you spent a lot of time in Denmark as well. I mean, Denmark, Scandinavian countries are very well known for their innovative and sort of not cutting edge, but pioneering education systems, educational philosophies. I think Leo knows a bit about this as well. But Leo, based on your experience and your time spent in Denmark, do you feel like Denmark has been able to effectively handle the situation, especially in terms of education or business and so on?
Yeah, I think knowing a bit about the educational system in Denmark as compared to Japan. Japan is pretty much based on the curriculum, learning, memorizing things, and just mastering whatever we are supposed to know in terms of different subjects. But in Denmark, to my understanding, the system focus on people's self-independent thinking process. So the teacher is not considered to be a teacher, but a facilitator or faculty to ask or just create an environment for kids to think about their own ideas, opinions, and encourage kids or students to find issues and the theme that they should focus on finding the answers. So that fundamental principle and philosophy that Danish education system will probably give country of the freedom or options to think about, how to handle current situation. So maybe so long as, the Bente, just correct me if I'm wrong, but so long as the government, educational authority is able to find out how to encourage kids' creativity or just finding, the issues and answer, I think that's more or less covering, what you have been doing.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So I'm. From my perspective, I don't see a huge gap here. That they have probably been least affected by the pandemic.
Right. The more sort of flexible, sort of creative, innovative a system is, I think, the more easily it adapts to changing environments, changing circumstances, and the more easily it creates new potential opportunities and ideas. And I think the more rigid a system is, like maybe, for example, Japanese education system would comparatively be a lot more rigid than the Danish one. It struggles in situations like this where the factors and environments are rapidly changing every day. So that's interesting. We have one last question from Rick. The key for economic growth has been the globalization of both things and people before COVID, but now that that is difficult, now that it is only going to be pretty much objects, things are being transferred and transported across countries, but people their travel has stopped suddenly. Can we grow worldwide in terms of the global economy in a situation like this? Or will the rules of the game change? Will it no longer be all about globalization? Would it maybe bounce back to localization and focusing exclusively on the domestic market? What do you all think?
That's a golden question, and probably
if we knew that question, the answer, then
yes,
we know everything.
Well, if I have from a Danish perspective, we are a small country, and I think many people have experienced that it is possible to do business online. You are able to connect, you are able to build up trustful relationships online. At least I have been used to this for many years. So I think that can be transferred, that can be extended. However, having said that, I also see when I start driving more now, since I do a little bit of driving, I see many small villages where they put a sign in front of the village where they say, our shops are open, please buy locally. So I think that could also shift our buying habits, that we will support the local grocery store, we will support the local farmer. I think that consciousness will increase because of this pandemic. It has started already with being a bit more careful about how things are transported, that we don't have to eat bananas from South America every day, that maybe you can, in summertime, you can buy the local strawberries or something like that. So I think somehow there's a trend there.
Absolutely.
More localization.
Yeah, I think, do you think Danish culture already was sort of more, not inward looking, I don't mean it in a negative way, but more focused on, supporting your community or, buying local instead of, buying import goods? Was that more of the culture before COVID too? Or is this something that you gradually noticed that, more and more people were supporting their local community and neighbors?
There was a movement before, and I think that has definitely expanded during these times. So they have been a huge increase in small web shops where the local farmers, they gather, then they form a community where you can go and order their food on the local site, and then there is one pickup place. So these kind of things I think has been strengthened a lot, but it was there before as well.
That's interesting because Leo, I mean, Japan is a very sort of community-oriented culture as well. And recently I see a lot of advertisements for like takeout restaurants and like, you know, pages of that people just created on their own, listing all of the local restaurants and where you can take out. I saw a flyer in my apartment advertising local restaurants that probably a resident made. So these kind of activities and initiatives are very interesting to see, and it's kind of heartwarming too. But Leo, would you say that Japan has always sort of been a traditionally like support your community, group focused, community oriented culture, and now that showing in this pandemic?
Yeah, I think, I mean, you know, Japan, majority of people in Japan is not that experienced in doing international business. So in that sense, I think, you know, people might not have direct impact by this, you know, localization. However, you know, when it comes to the total economy of the country, I think, you know, huge percentage is depending on international business, international, you know, transaction. So that amount of economy need to be covered by somewhere. So partially reviewing local business, maybe applying, you know, most advanced technology or new business models that major company were taking into local business practice might just increase the value of local business, but also, you know, some amount of the economy size still need to depend on international business. So I think the game change will be, you know, from, you know, the expand local business to international, global, to identify new way of business and get the market first. I think that kind of, you know, change will happen. So yeah.
Great. Yeah, I think that has been the theme in many of our sort of like events and interviews, sort of new ideas, new businesses, identify new opportunities. The existing trends are no longer trends anymore. They are of the past. We need to be forward looking and, you know, take action essentially. Okay. Well, I'm glad we were able to kind of end on a positive note after talking about government policies and finance.
Can I say one thing? So yes, just, you know, part of that, maybe, you know, for example, just collaborating people from local area from a country, and also another person or people or group from another local company sharing the best practices. I think that might just, you know, stimulate, accelerate, and help people to run their business better and you know, have their life better. So maybe people from Denmark, maybe small town, might have, you know, the system that Japan does not have, and then people from, you know, small town or city in Japan might have kind of interesting creative idea that Danish people might just get, you know, astonished. Then just exchanging the idea might just create a low-hanging fruit and the quick actions to, you know, stimulate local economy.
Yeah, definitely. So, more collaboration, information sharing across borders. Maybe, you know, borders don't matter anymore. We realize now, I mean, this event, borders don't matter at all. So maybe that is the new horizon for businesses. All right. Well, thank you, Bente, for joining us for nearly 2 hours. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Yes. And thank you to our viewers too. Many of them have joined us for the full 2 hours. Many of them have sent in comments and questions. Thank you very much. I hope it was as insightful and valuable as it was for me and for Leo as well. Thank you very much, Bente, again, and thank you everyone else for all the other panelists for joining. And we're getting a lot of thank you comments too in the chat. Yes. All right, so Sparkdojo webinars are going to begin 10 a.m. tomorrow morning too. So please look at the events chart in our website to see the webinar schedule, and hope to see you in future webinars and events as well. We have plenty coming up tomorrow too, so make sure you look at the schedule. All right, thank you, Bente. Thank you, Leo, and have a
Thank you so much.
And good afternoon to you, Bente.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you all. Bye, everyone.